Well, welcome to Local 3's podcast, Breaking Ground. We're back at it today, where we discuss all things labor, labor history, politics, and organizing as it relates to Operating Engineers Local 3, which is the largest construction trades local in North America. And I am very happy to have with us today Local 3's own Public Relations Department mastermind, John Matos. John, welcome.
Thank you.
He is a very effective labor communicator, writer, designer, and trainer for Operating Engineers Local 3. He's also my colleague. I have brought him on today to discuss a very hot topic right now, politics. We are right smack dab in the middle of a political season, and let's be honest, things are challenging right now for all of us, I think, whether it's COVID, we're just on the heels of some very tragic school shootings. People are very divided right now, and he's going to address this political division as it stands right now with unions across our country, but most specifically within our own union, and how we as an organization can overcome this division and how we actually have to in order to survive. So John, can you explain why you're kind of the ideal person to talk about this and how you're the most effective person here to help us deal with this problem?
So, I don't know about ideal, but I'll take it. So I came into this position intentionally. So when I was younger, growing up, I had friends and family who are union members. Not all of them. I had some who weren't and some who were. And it was very clear those who were lived a much better life, in my opinion. They were able to, afford to go on vacations and lived in houses and didn't have to rent from, crappy apartment buildings or anything like that. So I kind of grew up just having that general knowledge that union, although I didn't know what union meant, I knew it meant that you were doing pretty good. And it was also communicated to me very clearly, like when I was out of high school and looking for employment, friends and family were like, try to get a union job. And I didn't fully understand why that was such an emphasis put on that. But I did get a union job, and it paid me well. I had good benefits, but it was just a job for me at the time. I was still pretty young and didn't fully understand what it all meant being union. But after I left that job and went and worked for non-union employers, I immediately saw what I was missing. And so I actually became more engaged with it. One employer was so bad that I worked with that me and my coworkers actually tried to organize a little bit of a union there. Not a little bit, we tried to organize a union, but it's a long process. We talked to the union organizer. He was very clear, union elections take a long time. There's a lot of retaliation and stuff that goes on. So that didn't actually work out. We weren't able to even get to the point of even having an election. That's how uphill it was for that job. But it got me interested in understanding a little bit more why there was a difference between my non-union employment and my union employment, and understanding why a union would have been helpful at some of those jobs. So later on, when I decided to go back and get my education, I worked a lot of odd jobs in warehouses and all kinds of stuff. And so when I decided, I wanted to improve myself and try to get an education, get a better career, I specifically went into it with this idea that I would, if I could, I would really like to work within the labor movement because at firsthand experience, I felt like I was in a position where I could understand and help other people understand why a union was good for them as employees. So I studied communications, which is basically just understanding how to talk to people and how to understand them and help them understand you. But I probably annoyed most of my professors because every time we'd have an assignment, it would be something related to the labor movement. So I took a lot of film classes, and my topics would be like labor movement in film, and stuff like that. Or we'd talk about, I'd take communications theory classes, and it'd be like how such and such labor leader was able to effectively communicate with others. So I don't even know if I was doing it consciously, but when I looked back at the end of my graduation at my collection of finals and essays that I'd written, I'd say like 80% of them were about how to organize a union, why unions were good, stuff like that. So after I got my degree, I went looking for a job in the labor movement. I had two options. One was to become an organizer for a union out in Portland, Oregon, actually. And the other one was to come and work for Local 3. And this was a perfect fit for me. Journalism had been part of my emphasis in the communications program. And here, I work on staff for the Engineers News, which is the union's magazine. And also I work, as a public relations specialist. So our job in our department is really to communicate to our members as well as the public why unions are good, why our union specifically is beneficial to our members. So I come into this with that as my background and just working in a department where our goal all the time is to try to get people unified behind the union. So when it comes to this topic, it really sets me up as someone who knows the issues and knows how unions have traditionally dealt with them. So that's kind of why I'm here.
You mentioned labor history, and I think that's something that we've really come away from as a society, and just understanding the beginnings of unions in general, like why they existed. A lot of times I think people who are already in a union forget about the things that we fought so hard to achieve. And if you're not in a union, you're not even aware of it. So you came in with an interesting perspective, having experienced both sides and recognizing that your membership in a union gave you more. And then again, obviously your background. That's why John is the mastermind labor communicator, by the way. Going along those lines of what union means to people, let's talk a little bit about when a member first joins Local 3. What are some of the reasons why they generally do become a Local 3 member?
A lot of times it's for very core reasons. Maybe a union job pays more, almost always pays more. So right off the bat, that's one of the very common reasons you get when you talk to people about why they joined a union. It's not because they have these high ideals about what being a union member means. A lot of times they don't even necessarily know what being a union member means. All they know is it means more money on their paycheck. It might mean better benefits. So, with me, I had 2 children, and I just needed to have health care to make sure that when we took them to the hospital, we weren't, going bankrupt because we couldn't afford medical bills. So a lot of times it's because they know they're going to get better wages. They know they're going to get those good benefits, healthcare benefits. And then a big one, especially with Operating Engineers Local 3, is our pension program. So a lot of employers don't even offer pensions anymore. And a lot of working people understand that a pension means you're going to have a dignified retirement. So when you talk to people, those are usually the reasons they give. They're not about high ideals. They want a good job. They want good wages. They want good benefits, and they want to be able to retire.
Those sound like just basic core needs for most people in the country. And that's interesting. They may join not knowing anything about it, but their experience with the union changes over time. Like you said, either because they have a family that they have to support, or maybe they see that they get more wages on a contract because their union helps negotiate it. Or maybe they're thinking about retirement and they see, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this amount of money for the rest of my life. Like, that's friggin' awesome. So your idea of the union in Local 3 does change over time. But most of us in the beginning, as you said, are not ideologically committed to what a union means.
Yeah, I would say too, when a lot of people come into a union too, is initially it might be for those reasons. But over time, especially if you're active in the union, I think generally most union members realize after being union members and working union for so long that they are getting those benefits that they would not be getting if they were non-union. But I think even more than that is when people become more engaged with their union, and unions offer lots of ways you can be active in your union, you'll notice, or at least I notice, those individuals, their union membership tends to mean more to them over time, because they're not just looking at their paycheck anymore. They're looking at the bigger picture as they work with others and try to make sure that other people's needs are met as well as their own. So I definitely think that being union can be much more meaningful as time goes on.
Which does bring us to politics, because a lot of people don't even know up front that Local 3 plays a very big role in politics in terms of ensuring those things that we just discussed were very important to most families. And originally, some people may say, I'm not interested in politics. Maybe that was the case 10 years ago. But I would say today more people think they have an opinion about politics today than they ever have before, which has a lot to do with sort of the polarizing messaging that we're getting today, whether or not that's because of COVID, social media, warring media factions. Most people have a political opinion. Now, whether or not they connect that to the power their union has as it relates to politics is what we're going to kind of talk about today. How does Local 3 as an organization approach politics? Because it's very important.
So right out the gate, I would recommend, so anyone who's listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, is we do have a short little video that explains how Local 3 approaches politics. So I'd highly recommend people to watch that just as a brief introduction to kind of the way we do. But, unions traditionally, they're focused on workplace needs. So if workers tend to have similar needs. But the problem is that working people are going to be completely diverse in every possible way you can think of. So the challenge that our union had specifically when we were being organized is how do you get all these people who have different backgrounds, different values, different beliefs, whatever way they could be different from each other, how do you get them all to work together towards the same goals? And with us, or with unions in general, those goals are very specific. And again, those goals come back to making sure that people have jobs, so they have employment and can have a career, making sure that when they have those jobs, they're good jobs, so they pay well, they offer good benefits, and they give you an opportunity to have a dignified retirement. So Local 3, when we approach politics, we're looking at those specific issues because we know that's the place where you can get all of our members, regardless of what their differences are, to come together in agreement, because we're all going to need those things.
And they had to do that in 1939 when there was a lot of infighting in these different small little union factions in the Bay Area. You had the blade hands didn't want to talk to the dozers and everyone wanted to keep their work. There was no sharing of information. I mean, it was a big challenge to bring all of those smaller unions together. But those founding fathers knew what they were doing because they knew they'd be stronger if they could get everybody on the same page and unite them around those basic core values, which is what you just said. And the way Local 3 approaches politics today really isn't that much different. Like you said, we would suggest everyone look at that video because it explains it in a very clear way. We talked a lot about the diversity of those original kind of different unions. I would say that our members are still very diverse today. What are some of the ways they're diverse across our 4-state jurisdiction with close to 40,000 members?
They're diverse in the same way that Americans are diverse. So, if you try to picture in your mind what an American is, there's not going to be an easy way for you to visualize that because they're going to be from every race, every religion, every ethnicity. They might speak different languages at home. They might come from different backgrounds. Maybe they're single, maybe they're married, maybe they have children, maybe they don't. Any way that they can be diverse, they're going to be diverse. And that includes political opinions. So when we're talking about Local 3 members, just like Americans, we have all different kinds of opinions and beliefs and values that translate into our political position. And you're going to find that within Local 3. Because we do represent working people, that means we're representing Americans, and we're going to capture all the diversity that means. So the same diversity it means to be an American is going to exist within the union.
So if we were to take a snapshot of every member, with the polarizing extremes on the spectrum of people who are very extreme, progressives and very extreme conservatives, what would that look like with our population?
So I like to think of this as like we call it the political spectrum. So people will probably be familiar with these terms, but you tend to have, politically, you have left, you have right, and you have center. And if you just imagine that being a line with left, on the left and right, and then the center, we have 37,000, more than 37,000 members now, actually. But we have 37,000 members of this union. They're going to fall anywhere along that spectrum. So you're going to have people who are very liberal, and you're going to have people who are very conservative, and you're going to have everything in between. And I mean that literally, everything in between. That is the challenge is, okay, so if that's the case, how do we get people, 37,000 people who fall all along that political spectrum, how do we get them on the same page and pursuing the same goals for the mutual benefit of everybody?
And I would say recognizing that the majority of people are kind of somewhere in the middle, even in like America, is worth mentioning because if you watch the news or you pay attention to social media, you're going to feel like everyone is super extreme. Like everybody has 100% skin in the game here and here, but the majority of people are somewhere in the middle if they're even actively affiliated with one side or another. And again, Local 3 covers 4 states, so that's a lot of different counties even within those states. Even within the state of California, you're going to have a member possibly on one side of the spectrum who lives in San Francisco versus a member who lives in Manteca, right? So they're going to be on a different section on that political spectrum. But like you said, the challenge is not talking about how they're different, it's what can they agree on.
Yeah, and here in the United States, we're a two-party political system. So, every now and then you'll have an independent candidate or someone from a third party running for office. But by and large, our elections are going to be between a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate. And so because of that, you're right, in the news or in the media or on the radio or wherever you look, you're going to see things talked about as if there's just these two opposing sides. And a lot of times it even comes across as if they're two monolithic sides, right? It's like all Republicans believe this, all Democrats believe this, and they're always opposed to each other and they're always trying to battle it out. But as you said, most people are not that, they don't think that way, they don't exist that way. So I saw a recent poll, I think it was done by Gallup, but they looked at eligible voters in the United States. So eligible means you don't necessarily have to be someone who does vote.
It means you're 18 and you were born in the United States.
Yeah, so you have American citizenship and you're able to vote in an election. When you just look at that, 23% of Americans, eligible voters, are Democrats and 21% are Republicans. So they're very similar, but if you add that up, that's not even half the population. So that means that more than half of all people do not feel strongly enough to register or identify with either political party.
And that's shocking.
It's not the message you get, right? The message you get is that Democrats and Republicans are the only two people that are out there and they all hate each other. And the reality is like, nah, more than half people are like, I don't even want to be involved with any of this because I'm not
committed.
I'm not invested in either one. I don't feel strongly enough about the issues that are being addressed by either political party to even register.
And there's a lot of issues out there.
Yeah.
So we go back to that video, watching the video and like historically how Local 3 has handled this. How does Local 3 manage to represent all of these members along all this political spectrum when they are so diverse?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of times people think that because a union, we represent our members. That's what unions do. A lot of people will think what that means is that the union represents them specifically. And what I mean by that is we talked about that political spectrum and you have 37,000 members. There's no way you're going to be able to represent the individual opinions of each of those members, right? So when people have that misunderstanding, they think, why is the union not representing my political views? And it's because the union is not there to represent anyone's political views. The union is there to pursue specific policies and legislation that benefits our members in very specific ways. So we do that by representing the needs of our members as opposed to representing the individual members' opinions. So we all share the same needs, and those come back to we all need employment. We all need good wages, we all need good benefits, and we all need a retirement. Working people in general across the board, doesn't matter if you're left, right, center, you're gonna need a good job, good pay, good healthcare, good benefits. And so that's the part where as a union, when we say that we represent our members, that's really what we mean, is that we're representing their needs. We're trying to identify what's gonna benefit them in terms of those specific issues. And then we make our endorsements based on that, and we try to encourage our union members to engage politically with putting aside all their differences and saying, let's come together and work on these specific things.
Can you explain that just a little bit further, the difference between representing a member and representing their needs, say, in a different profession?
Yeah, so I think we come across this all the time in our personal lives, but we just don't think about it because no one really talks openly about that's how it's arranged. But if, for example, if I hire a financial advisor, that financial advisor, their job is to look after my financial needs. So if I come in and I have, just as a personal interest, I think pet rocks are amazing. If I go to my financial advisor and I say, I want you to take my entire life savings, cash out all my stocks and bonds, whatever it is, and I want you to take all of that and I want you to invest it in pet rocks, that financial advisor is going to be, no way, there's no way we're doing that, because they're representing the needs of you as their client. They're not representing your own personal interest. Lawyers is another good example. So lawyers will represent the needs of their client. So if their client is on trial or something, they're not going to come in there and be like, this guy thinks the crime you did was great and there's no problem. They're going to be like, regardless of whether that's the personal opinion of that person, they're going to go before the judge and they're going to argue the best case they can, because they're looking out for the needs of their client. So we come across that just in our lives.
And we accept it.
Yeah. I mean, a real estate agent is supposed to represent your needs. Your financial advisor is supposed to represent your needs. Any legal counsel. A union is another one of those things. It's another institution that's there to represent the needs of their members.
Another challenge I think we have as an organization is we may not always all get along. You may be on a crew with someone who, thinks we should be eating cats for lunch. And you may, totally not agree with that opinion. But you still kind of care about this person because you've got to work with them. You've got to do this job together. And I think as individuals, we all have that experience even in our own families. I personally have a very extreme conservative family members who think, COVID didn't exist. And then I have, gay rights activists who like to march. Obviously, those are very polar extremes, but when we all get together at Thanksgiving, we eat the turkey and we laugh. And I may not identify with either one of those people, but I want them to be okay. Like, I want them to have a good job. I want them to be able to retire and be okay. They are in the people I care about kind of bubble. And I would argue that we as union members feel the same way about our fellow union members. I mean, isn't that the point?
Yeah, and in fact, we even use the terminology. So in the labor movement in general, you talk about union brothers, union sisters, union family. That's what we're talking about. It's like with your own family, or I'm sure everyone has this experience to some extent, but there might be people in your friends, circle of friends, or within your family who you might get together, and when you do, all you do is argue because you cannot see eye to eye on anything. So maybe you have Thanksgiving dinner and you have an uncle who just the entire time he's just wanting to argue about every little thing, and he has completely conflicting views and opinions about everything. But when you walk him out to his car at that night, you pat him on the back and you look forward to seeing him the next time. So I would say that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the people I care about bubble. Is they're the people that when we think about who's in our lives, you don't have to agree with anyone. You don't even sometimes have to like being in someone's company all the time. But at the end of the day, you still want them to do well. You still want them to have a good job. You still want them to make good wages. You want them to be able to go see the doctor when they need to, or take their family members, and you want them to be able to retire and enjoy their golden years. So that's what we're talking about. And again, as a union and within the labor movement, we even use that terminology without fully thinking about it. But we talk about each other being part of each other's family.
That term solidarity, which is thrown around quite a lot without, I think, a lot of really understanding what it means. It's on mottos and logans and slogans. What does solidarity really mean?
So the textbook definition of solidarity is that it's unity or agreement of feelings or action among individuals who have common needs. And it's mutual support within that. So you're supporting each other and trying to achieve those needs. So yeah, we use that term a lot in the labor movement and within the union. We use the term solidarity, but sometimes it's more of a concept, and it's good to spell it out what exactly that's talking about. And that's what we're saying today. And what we're talking about is solidarity is the fact that knowing all your differences, you're still able to stand with each other in pursuit of shared needs and shared goals.
So along the lines of those shared needs and shared goals, what are the very common things that we as union Local 3 members can agree on across the board?
So I think it comes back to what we've been saying the whole time, and we're going to hammer away at this all the time because it's really at the core of everything, which is that we all need jobs, first of all, and not just jobs, but careers. So when we're talking about operating engineers, this is a skilled trade. You don't come into this without investing some time and energy into being trained and becoming a professional. So we're talking about careers, and careers that pay well. So you don't want to just have enough to afford gas to go to and from work. You want to be able to go on those vacations with your family, go camping with your friends, ride dirt bikes on the weekend, maybe go hunting. So that's what we're talking about, is good wages, not just wages, but good wages. And then we're talking about benefits. So, I wear glasses. I need benefits to help me afford my glasses. healthcare, taking your children to the hospital, or going to a clinic, or doing your regular checkups to prevent things from happening later on. And then retirement. So the ability to, after a long career, you've put in a lot of work and a lot of energy into helping your employers do well. And at some point in your career, that favor gets returned through your retirement. So you're able to retire. And again, we're talking about dignified retirement. So we're not talking about, sitting in a dark room somewhere for the rest of your life. We're talking about being able to enjoy your life in your golden years after having worked for so long.
Retirees do. I've just talked to one recently who said how well he's doing, and he's been retired for like 15 years, and he travels, and he just is so grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, when we go to the retiree picnic, we meet people like that all the time, and they're just enjoying life, driving their RV with their spouse across the country, or whatever their interests and hobbies may be. They have the resources to live a good life.
And that's not the case for a lot of senior citizens in this country who are relying only on Social Security and are barely making ends meet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was kind of being, a little bit flippant there, talking about sitting in a dark room, but unfortunately, that is the reality for some people who don't have those retirement benefits. They don't have the money to barely pay their bills, let alone enjoy their golden years. So that's what we're talking about. We're saying like a dignified retirement.
So these shared needs or directives, they're not something that you just made up out of thin air either. We've been talking a lot about Local 3's history. All of these shared needs are highlighted perfectly well in the Local 3 Bylaws book, which was written in, I believe, the beginning of the founding of the organization in 1939. You can thumb through this, and it explains quite clearly the objects and purposes of this union are to improve the economic conditions of its members, all employees and working men, women, and minors by all lawful means and methods. That's on Section 1A. I'm just going to go through kind of the list of the ones that we predetermined by looking through this. And you've already mentioned some of these. For one, we want work that will keep us employed throughout our careers. We want good wages to support ourselves and our families. We want strong health and welfare benefits. We want a comfortable retirement. We want the ability to defend our collective bargaining rights. We want workplace representation, contract enforcement, job security, a safe workplace, and uniform safety standards, as well as career training. And these are not just made up. These are straight from the bylaws. And I would argue that our members would agree that these things are very important to them, regardless of their political views.
Yeah, I think across the board, no matter where you fall on that political spectrum we talked about, across the board, at the end of the day, you're going to need those things. If you're a working person and you're not living off of your great grandfather's investments or something, you're going to want a good job, good pay, good benefits, all that stuff. And like you said, those all come from our bylaws. Our bylaws are written like a contract would be, so it uses language that can be kind of dense, contract language, legalese, you might call it. But that's what you just went over right there. That's like a translated version of it. But it's not like it's new concepts.
And they're very clear. They're very clear that, okay, so this is what we want to ensure our members have. So how do they go about, how does Local 3 as an organization go about trying to meet those needs, John?
So a big part of what we do is we work with other organizations or other groups that share those needs with us. So we call those coalitions. A coalition is just an organization or a grouping of people or groups that come together because they have some shared goals that they can agree about. It doesn't mean they agree about everything. In fact, almost always they don't agree about everything, but they have very specific issues that they do agree about, and they can work with us and we can work with them to try to achieve them.
So what are some examples of these coalitions?
So some common ones would be the AFL-CIO. That's a coalition of unions from across the country representing all different kinds of trades, all different types of classifications. So we work with the AFL-CIO. At the local level, we work with labor councils, which is a similar thing. It's unions in a geographic region that can work together for shared purpose or goals that they have in common. Building trades councils, which is these are specifically unions like ours that represent workers who are in the construction industry, building and construction. So you're talking about electricians, plumbers, carpenters, laborers, operating engineers. We work with building trades quite a bit. We also work with employers, though. So a big one that we work with is AGC or UConn. These are organizations of union employers, and we work with them on shared needs. We're across from them at the negotiating table when it comes to a lot of stuff, but there's some things that we can work together towards. For example, making sure that there is enough funding to have the projects that keep our members employed. The employers need those jobs because that's what their industry is. Our workers need those jobs because without them, they don't have a career. So we have that shared goal and we work together. So those are some of the common coalitions that you'll see that we work with.
And within our states, obviously California has a lot of these coalitions, but say Hawaii, they have the Hawaii Operating Engineers Industry Stabilization Fund. That's a coalition. Nevada has the Nevada AFL-CIO. Utah has Utah.
Even operating engineers is a coalition. We're a coalition of crane operators, surveyors, grade checkers. I mean, we represent a whole variety of classifications. So even operating engineers local 3 is itself a coalition of workers from those different aspects of the industry. And then the international.
The international, I'm just going to say that. And the big elephant in the room, political parties are coalitions by definition.
Yeah, exactly. So here in the United States, our founding fathers, when they set up our political system, it ended up being dividing into a two-party political system. And basically all it means is that we talked about that spectrum. There's people from the center to the right and center to the left. Tends to be if you're from the center to the right in current American politics, you tend to align with the Republican coalition. If you identify with the center to the left, you tend to identify with the Democratic coalition. But at the end of the day, they're just coalitions as well.
Now, within those coalitions, there are certain issues that they take on. So let's talk about some of those sections. So, for instance, the NRA, which is a big discussion right now. Where does the NRA fall between those two coalitions generally?
Right. So, again, coalitions are just groups of individuals with shared goals. So the NRA has a specific goal in mind, right? They're there to represent or to represent their view about the Second Amendment, basically, right? So you have the NRA, which tends to align with the Republican Party. That doesn't mean that you can't be a Democrat and be a member of the NRA. And that's important to remember about all these coalitions. You don't have to, it doesn't exclude you from participating, but they tend to align with whatever coalition they feel is pursuing their needs to the best of their ability. So, the National Rifle Association tends to align with the Republican Party. You'll get environmentalist groups, for example, might identify with the Democratic coalition. So Sierra Club, for example. You get business groups like Club for Growth, for example, is part of the Republican coalition. They pursue what they view as their needs, which is lower tax rates for businesses, more business-friendly policies.
The National Right to Work Foundation.
On the Democratic side, we talked about there's environmental groups. There's labor has been a big part of the Democratic coalition for quite some time now, thanks in large part because of FDR. He was very pro-union and he was a Democrat, and he established that as part of that coalition for decades. And you have, for example, LGBTQ plus tends to align with the Democratic coalition. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't be a Republican and be gay, for example, or you can't be a Democrat and be pro-business, or you can't be a Republican and be pro-environment. It just means that when they look at how do we pursue our shared needs in politics, they tend to identify which coalition is going to pursue those needs for them. And Local 3, we do the same thing. We look at which coalition is going to help us get those jobs with good pay, with good health care and a pension, and protect our collective bargaining rights above all, pretty much.
So, John, where would union workers go in terms of the two-party system?
So we talked about labor tends to be part of the Democratic coalition. Since FDR, that's been kind of the case. But the individual workers are going to be found in both coalitions.
And that's kind of a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, if you know union workers, you know that there's some who are Republican, there's some who are Democrat, there's some who are independent, there's some who don't like politics at all, right? So you're going to find, just like we talked about that diversity, you're going to find that within the union, and you're going to have members who are Republican and members who are Democrats and choose to identify with either of those coalitions.
Do we want union members to be in both sides?
Absolutely. So it's important. Not only do we want it, but we actually need it.
Well, this is kind of confusing because I would think that if all of our union members were on one party, we'd have all the power in that side.
You might have all the power on that side, but what happens when you're not in power, when that side is not in power?
You mean like with the presidential candidate or the House or the Senate are the opposite of that party? So explain that to me a little bit.
So if we have, let's say we have, elections, we have them every 2 years or every 4 years. If we fully committed and tied our horse to one political coalition, then that would mean that whenever that coalition was not in power, we were not represented. So let's say we endorse candidates on the Democratic side, and all those candidates lose, and the people who take office are all Republicans. If we have no members who can say to those Republicans, I'm a member of your party, here's what our needs are as part of your coalition, and I need you to pursue them. If we didn't have that, we might make gains every 2 years, every 4 years, but we would have all those gains wiped away the next 2 to 4 years.
So you have to have skin in every game, every time.
Yeah, we want to be the thing with unions is we always want to be at the table, right? So a lot of times we're talking about negotiations, but that's not just negotiations, that's everything. We want to be at the table when it comes to political decisions, we want to be at the table when it comes to workplace conditions.
So yeah, again, that seems shocking that we want people on both sides. But you explain that that's because it gives us influence. When our endorsed candidates win or when they don't win, we want to have continual conversations with whichever party is and is not in power so that our needs are heard at the top. So what do we do if we endorse a candidate as a union and they're on, say we endorse a Republican and we have a Democratic member who just doesn't know what to do then? Do they need to align with their entire party or do they align with their union? And what can they do if they're conflicted about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to refer to these as protest votes, but a lot of times in the media you'll hear the same concept talked about, but they'll use the term swing votes or swing voters. So a swing voter, or the term I use, protest voter, is someone, a voter who might be part of a coalition. So for example, they might be part of the Democratic coalition, but if the candidate who's running for office as a Democrat did not, maybe they represented the needs of all different parts of that coalition, the environmental groups, the LGBTQ plus groups, or any other aspect of their coalition, but they did not address the needs of union workers, then even though I'm part of that coalition, I can protest the fact that that candidate is not representing my part of the coalition by saying to them, either I'm not going to vote for you, or I'm going to go and vote for your opponent. Or with the union, not only am I going to vote against you, but I'm also going to go and knock on doors as a volunteer and tell my fellow citizens to not vote for you as well. Or maybe I'm going to go and phone bank. I'm going to call people and be telling them, as a union worker, this candidate does not represent us. I'm asking that you join with us in not voting for that candidate. So that's what I would call a protest vote.
So the protest vote, it really isn't that effective unless you have a coalition who performs a protest vote. I mean, we talk about these swing states. I mean, that's how presidents are elected, because if everything aligned perfectly, it would be 50-50. But we always have those people who change their side.
Right. Yeah, and politicians know this. They know that they cannot win elections if they only have their base, right? So that's what politics is you're trying to win people who might not normally agree with you to cast their ballot for you, right?
And they try to get that through getting the support of all of these different coalitions, bringing them together. Yeah. Which is why you see ads geared toward different coalitions. We want to make sure that they're gearing their purpose on our coalition.
Yeah, and it's one of the only effective ways that voters can do that too, because we talked about the need to have union workers in both coalitions, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And that's because for example, if a Democratic candidate is running and they're like, that person says they're not going to vote for me, but they're a Republican anyways, they weren't going to vote for me either way, right?
Yeah, they write that one off.
Yeah, they write them off. But if they say, I'm not winning over that voter and they're part of my coalition, that's when they start to be like, oh no, I'm losing, not only am I not gaining those new voters, I'm losing the ones I already have. So yeah, it's very important that we have representation in both parties so that we can do that, so that we can say when a candidate is not pursuing our needs, they could be pursuing any other issues outside of what our issues are, but if they're not pursuing ours, that's when we have the power to stand up and say, we're organized and we can we can make sure that you understand that if you don't meet our needs, you're not going to get our votes.
It's not going to be comfortable for you. And in what ways do we make it uncomfortable for them? How has Local 3 been set up to ensure that these politicians we support or oppose know that, we bring a big game? What do we do?
So I'd say the first thing we do is we have what's called political action committees. These are just regular members of the union who have been elected by their peers to represent their area. So in our union, we have our districts, and each district has its elected political action committee. And their job is to come in and to look at policy proposals that the candidates are putting forward, to look at their voting record to see what, when did their vote actually line up with what they're saying, right? And they look at those things. They don't look at what party do they belong to. They don't look at what's their opinion on abortion rights or gun rights. They're looking at what are their policies in terms of those jobs, wages, benefits, and pension.
Oh, back to the shared needs.
Yeah. So that's one way we do that. We're organized in that way so that we have an objective way of just determining which candidates and which policies are going to help us meet those needs that we talked about.
So that's the Political Action Committee, which again is elected at the district level by the members for the members. And they meet all the time throughout the political season to vet these candidates. And what else do we do?
We also have what's called our vote program. So that stands for Voice of the Engineer. And that's a volunteer program. It's grassroots here in the union so that, let's say your county has an important election coming up. We'll ask for volunteers, and what those volunteers can do is they can come in and precinct walk, which is what I was referring to earlier, which is literally just you meet up at a central place, and then you go out and you knock on doors for voters, and you might give them a little pamphlet and tell them, we're asking you to support this candidate because they support us on our needs, or we're asking you to oppose this candidate because they oppose us on our needs. That's one way. We also do it through precinct walking, which is another vote program,
Phone banks.
Phone banking is just, you come in to an office at the hall usually, and it's just a room set up with some phones, and you call voters and you tell them, I'm with Operating Engineers Local 3, and we're supporting this candidate because they support us on these needs, or we're opposing this candidate because they're opposing us on these needs. So it's more than just we make the endorsements. I mean, the endorsements alone are important because you're saying that if you supported us or not, either way, our membership are going to receive these endorsements, telling them which people are pursuing our needs and which ones are not. So that already is a big deal. But on top of that, we actually have people going door to door and knocking on your constituents' doors and telling them why they, as a fellow citizen, are going to vote or not vote for you. So it's very powerful. And elected officials know that. That's why an endorsement from Local 3 or opposition from Local 3 is a big deal. Yeah.
Means something. And I think there's been a lot of research done. They call it sort of grassroots or boots on the ground. But when you're a union member and you knock on a fellow union member's door and say, look, I'm supporting this city council member, that has a lot more power than when it's a stranger or you just drop a flyer on the doorstep. Because it means, A, you're taking out time on your weekend. You think it's that important. And B, you know that this other member probably has the shared needs that you do. I know people get kind of annoyed sometimes when we phone bank or call them, but if you really understood the process behind it, we're kind of just taking the work out of it for you. Yeah. So when you get your ballot in the mail, you're not like that name sounds kind of good. I don't know. There's ways that you can actually strengthen your union, and we've done a lot of that work for you. It's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, and if you think about, before unions were legally recognized in the United States, you had to be an absolute activist to be involved in the labor movement. You were going to get beat up. Sometimes you'd get killed. You'd get fired for your job, almost guaranteed every single time. But because we have been able to organize in this way, you don't actually have to be an activist anymore. You can just go to work and then on the weekend come out for an hour and precinct walk. You don't have to be that level of engagement. So it's really a nice thing to see that we're organized in a way where each of us can contribute and we don't have to devote our lives to it.
So basically what you're saying is that our endorsements are meaningless unless there's action behind them. And Local 3 has all of this action or has all of this political clout where ideally the politicians pay attention to us. And if we endorse them and then they don't, we're not going to support them again. And then they know that that's happening because Local 3's needs which we discussed with the bylaws, they need to be taken seriously. And they are, as long as we maintain this kind of political structure that we have with the vote program, with the PACs, and with member engagement.
And we also, I just want to say too, we don't come into it naive, when we're part of these coalitions. We know that other parts of the coalitions we work with have their own separate needs from ours. Employers are going to have different needs than us, right? They want to save money. They don't want to pay as much. They don't want to have to pay as much for health care benefits. They don't want to have to contribute to the pension plan or contribute to training. I mean, some of them want to, but you know what I'm saying? It's not in their financial interest. They could probably make a lot more money by paying people a lot less and providing less benefits. So we don't always have to agree on those things. But we need to also be aware that when we come into these things, they have their needs and we have ours. There's nothing wrong with us pursuing ours.
Yeah, I mean, they still want work too.
And they're going to try to convince us that their needs are better than ours, or more important than ours. And it works. I mean, you'll see people who they do come to a conclusion where they're saying, okay, well, maybe the fact that I have these union needs, a good job with good pay, maybe it's not as important as, I don't know, some other cause that they've picked up. So the other parts of the coalitions, they are always, always, always trying to convince union workers that their needs are more important than our needs. And as a union, we stand up and say, no, our union needs are important needs, and they're universal.
So how does this information benefit those listening who may wonder, why does it really matter what the union tells me to do? I don't agree with many of the things the candidates they support believe in. Maybe they feel very strongly about abortion rights, and we support a candidate who's not aligned with those. What is that member supposed to do with this? And they're going to feel conflicted. I know they feel conflicted. It happens all the time.
Oh, it definitely happens all the time. But at the end of the day, our members, when the union makes an endorsement for a candidate or a ballot measure or something, the individual members, they still have their choice. So no one is taking their choice away from them. But when it comes down to it, it's just a matter of fact. They only have really 5 choices. The first one is what we a lot of times refer to as vote union or voting union. And that just means you have confidence that the endorsements made by our political action committee members are in fact going to represent the needs that we all share together.
Back to that list that we mentioned previously.
Your next option is to not vote union, to vote the opposite. Obviously, the union's not going to encourage you to do that. We want all of our members to be united on these specific goals. But you still have your choice. If you want to vote against that, that's your individual choice at the end of the day. But just know that if that's the position you're taking, the union is going to be trying up until election day to get you to change your mind. That's just the name of the game. It might be, some people might find it annoying or something, but we're trying to work together for a shared goal.
As will be every other coalition that calls you.
So you're just going to have to come to terms with the fact that that's going to be the case. I mean, you still have your choice. You can still do your thing. But as a union, we're still going to ask our members to vote according to the endorsements that we think are going to be in the best interest of our membership. Then you have, you can cast a protest vote, which is what I was talking about earlier. So maybe you are a Republican, and the Republican candidate is taking positions that either do not support those union needs or sometimes even oppose them. As a Republican, you can let your officials know, I'm part of your party, and I'm still going to have to vote for your opponent because you're not meeting our needs. So cast a protest vote. The union's going to endorse that. If it requires you to make a protest vote in order to pursue our shared goals, then the union's going to support that. The other option is not vote at all. We are never going to encourage that because that just literally takes your voice off the table at all. Like, you have no say at that point. So we do not encourage our members to not vote. We tell them, vote however you want, but vote. And then the last option is you can run for office.
Which is something I don't think a lot of people think is possible, but we do have some members who run for office and have been quite successful. And maybe why? Well, because they have the Local 3 coalition supporting them.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the coalition you've chosen, we talked about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, doesn't matter. Whichever coalition you're part of, if the people who are running on that ticket are not representing the needs that we share as union members, you can be that candidate for your party that does. You can be the Republican who runs on a pro-labor agenda. You can be a Democrat who runs on the pro-labor agenda. If that's not being represented in your area, step up and be that person. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
So there are a lot of political issues that Local 3 does not address, and it was never meant to address. And again, I bring this back to today. You can't watch the news without feeling triggered or feeling strongly to respond to some piece of information that you received with very polarizing viewpoints. Some people want the union to focus on the issues they are personally interested in and passionate about. But as a union, and we've said this already, we only focus on those core needs, which were better pay, retirement, health and welfare, the ability to collectively bargain, and to have work. Issues beyond that can still be addressed by people, right? We're not telling you, hey, you've got to vote the union way, nothing else matters. We're saying, cool, join another coalition that will address those needs. We're not saying you can't have them.
And you're not renouncing your Local 3 membership by doing that. So let's say, for example, if you're a person who is passionate about gun rights, you can go and join the NRA, which focuses on gun rights issues, and still be a part of Local 3, which represents workplace issues. So that's across the board. I just use the NRA as an example, but it doesn't matter what it is. If you're passionate about abortion as an issue, either for or against, there are coalitions that their focus is on that issue, and they work in the political coalitions that we talked about to try to get what they have identified as their needs led through legislatively. So again, it comes back to Local 3 is a coalition that is very, very specifically focused on those core issues of jobs, wages, benefits, and retirement. Outside of that, if those issues are important to you, that's fine, but Local 3 is not going to be the coalition to represent those other outside needs and interests. You're going to have to look for other coalitions. And the way the American system is set up is there's plenty of coalitions.
There's lots of coalitions.
There's lots of places you can go to pursue whatever interest you have personally. Local 3 is the one that is specifically identified with those core issues. And we are only effective if we're focused on those core issues.
It might be worth mentioning too, as I said before, in these divided times, maybe it's best not to talk about these very polarizing issues on a job site or to your union agent because they can't address them. And you're just going to create more division with a crew who's in your people I care about bubble where you're just trying to get a job done. I would suggest people just talk about what unifies them, what unites them. We're coming so far away from that right now throughout the country. People are just angry, confused, depressed. They're not doing very well. What's some things that we can agree upon? I mean, let's have a little bit more of that.
Yeah, and when you talked about things can look kind of bleak when you're just watching the news all the time, and it seems like people are at each other's throats, but it's kind of inspiring to know that there are coalitions like ours which are focused on just having a better life, you know? So yeah, I think it's kind of hopeful. It's not just that this is how we're organized. We're organized this way, and it's, to me, very inspiring.
And it makes perfect sense. Right. It sounds like, to kind of summarize what you shared today, in order to overcome political division within our union, we should check out our bylaws. I mean, we didn't come up with this. Your officers didn't come up with this. I mean, this has been around since the beginning of Local 3 in 1937. So kind of build on what our retirees already knew. As we mentioned previously, focus on uniting, not dividing. This is true for your job sites. This is true for at your union meetings. Tailor what we talked about today to your own situation, trying to always kind of bring it back to those unifying principles that we discussed. We may not be able to agree on gun rights laws, but we can sure as hell agree that we want to have a good wage and we want to have a job every day until we retire. There's no question about that. Again, we talk a lot about policy over party. We're not tied to any one political, coalition. We're not 100% Democrat or 100% Republican, regardless of what I think some of our members believe. Today's Republicans were yesterday's Democrats, so the parties change over time. But again, those unifying principles, which we've mentioned, have remained. I think it's important to say that Local 3 as an organization is not trying to control its members. And you may not agree with what we're saying here, but maybe you can respect where we're coming from, the process.
Yeah, exactly. Again, you have your individual choice. But again, there's only those 5 options. Because we are a union and we're organized around those specific goals, the union itself is always going to try to encourage its membership to unify around those shared needs and really pursue them in that light. So yeah, it's important to remember there's no element of control here. It's just trying to influence our members to work together towards getting those shared goals achieved.
And we need to become really clear on what those shared needs are. Who are we? And why are we fighting for it? It isn't about being a Republican or a Democrat, because we all want what's best for each other, our fellow members. And it's easier to protect these things that we have and make gains from there than it is to lose what we have and fight to get those back. We've seen that in other areas.
I think at the end of the day, that's really important, is that, again, you have your own individual choice, and maybe you conclude that you don't want to vote according to the union's endorsements. That's fine, but we really should at least understand and respect why the union is making the endorsements it's making. It's not because it holds any particular views about social issues or any of those other things, hot button topics that are out there in the world today. It's very, very specifically, we're pursuing those good jobs, good wages, good benefits, and a retirement, and that has not changed. That has been the same since the union was created. So it doesn't matter if you're talking 1955 or 1985 or 2005, the union has always been trying to focus on those workplace shared needs.
Well, you and I know, John, looking through the archives in the Engineers News back in, from 1940, every single decade, these issues haven't changed. Since the beginning of Local 3's founding, there's always these kind of warring factions trying to take away the union. Why? Because it's in their best interests. But we have to stay on top of our toes. And I'm going to argue now more than ever, because this country is so divided.
Yeah, I mean, there's coming to mind right now, there's several states that historically have been very strong union states. They have a high rate of unionization in them. And I won't go into any specifics right now, but there's some states that's been the case for so long. And in recent elections, they've lost rights that union workers had to fight for the last 100 years. They lose them in one election cycle. And unfortunately, once you lose them, they're very, very difficult to get back. It's much easier to make gains or to make gains from where we are now than to lose the rights and benefits that we have as union workers now and try to get them back later. It's very much more of an uphill battle. So when we make those endorsements, that's always in mind as well, is what's not only going to help our members now, but into the future. What's going to make sure that their rights are not dependent on one election cycle, but they're going to have those good jobs regardless of what happens politically. Yeah, and if there's any way we can be united, I believe it's on those issues of people just need to have employment, they need to have good jobs, they need to have good benefits, they need to have a pension. And I don't just mean that as in it helps us get united, it helps people in general. Neighborhoods are better, individuals' lives are better.
People are happier. There's less depression, less mental illness.
Yeah, you're not, fantasizing about violence against your neighbors when you're enjoying a vacation with your family because you have a good job.
Well, and also there's something about being a part of something bigger than yourself, being a part of like a community of people with shared goals. I mean, people get a lot of value out of sometimes churches, sometimes their kids' sports teams. Local 3 is that and can serve that for you if you try to get involved, and good things happen. And then it's not just a connection of, oh, I'm going to get vote hours. It's, oh, I'm going to go see Bob who lives down the street from me, and we're going to make sure that our streets are safe. I mean, it's there are big things that are possible here. We can't focus on the polarizing things and lose sight of who we are, what we have, and how we need to protect it.
Yeah, and I would say I even see this reflected in our individual union members' lives, is that I noticed that people who are engaged in their union tend to be engaged in their community. Growing up, I had baseball coaches in Little League who are union members. I had my family are Portuguese, and there's a Portuguese hall. A lot of the people who were engaged in the Portuguese hall were also union members. So it has this added benefit of just helping people come together and work in their communities. And I think it's because of the fact that when you get people united on these issues, it opens up possibilities that are beneficial to all of us.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming in today. We would urge our viewers and listeners to check out the podcast, or not the podcast, I'm sorry, the video about how Local 3 approaches politics. It really does simplify a lot of the things that we talked about today. And I think what we discussed today is very important. And it is hopeful, like you said.
Yeah, I think it's a hopeful message. I think that the union message is a hopeful message.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks to our listeners.
Thank you.